My son took my retirement savings and flew to Europe for what he called a business trip. He came back 10 days later with a tan, a new watch, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He walked straight to the kitchen, opened the garage door to grab a beer, and stopped cold. The color drained from his face. He stood there gripping the doorframe, staring at what was behind it, unable to speak. A few days before that, I had found something in his old bedroom that changed everything. A printed document. A signature line with my name already typed underneath it, and a sticky note in his handwriting that said, "Dad won't fight it. He was wrong. Comment and tell me where you're watching from." This story has been shared more than I ever expected, and I think you need to hear it. The sound that stopped him came at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Friday in early October in my house on Clover Mill Road in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It wasn't a scream exactly. It was more like the air going out of a man who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't solid, a low, strangled what that came from somewhere deep in his chest. I heard it from the kitchen table where I was sitting with my second cup of coffee, and I didn't move. I had been waiting for exactly that sound for 4 days. My son had come through the front door 20 minutes earlier, dragging a carry-on bag that was clearly too heavy for a carry-on. His jacket slung over one arm, phone already pressed to his ear. He was talking to someone about a deal, some property in Charlotte. Numbers that meant nothing to me. He waved at me the way you wave at a piece of furniture when you walk past it. He set his bag down in the hallway I'd refinished 3 summers ago, kicked his shoes off onto the runner rug his mother had picked out the year before she passed, and kept talking. When he finally hung up, he came into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator out of habit, stared at the mostly empty shelves, and said, "Did you not go shopping?" I said, "There's something in the garage." He didn't ask why. He doesn't ask why. He just walked over, hit the button on the wall, and watched the door roll up. That's when the sound came. To understand what he was looking at, you need to understand what happened while he was gone. So sit down. I'm going to tell you everything, from the beginning, and I'm going to tell it slowly, because it deserves to be told that way. My son's name is Derek. He's 41 years old. He works in real estate, or says he does. The details shift depending on who's asking. Sometimes he's a developer. Sometimes he's an investor. Sometimes he's a consultant for a firm I've never been able to find online. What I know is that he makes money in complicated ways that he can never fully explain, and he spends it in ways that he can explain all too easily. He moved back into my house 14 months ago after his second marriage ended. He told me it would be 3 months. He told me he just needed to get back on his feet. He told me the divorce had blindsided him. I believed him. I believed all of it, the way a father believes his son, because that's what fathers do. My wife Carol passed 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning I held her hand in the hospital room while the monitor went flat. She was 62 years old. She had been planning to take a ceramics class that fall. She had a list on her phone of places she wanted to visit. Savannah, Georgia, the Oregon coast, a small town in Vermont where her grandmother was from. She never made it to any of them. After she died, I rattled around the house on Clover Mill Road like a marble in a shoebox. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. The garden she'd kept going for 20 years. I thought about selling. My daughter, who lives in Colorado, called every Sunday and asked me to consider moving closer to her. I told her I wasn't ready. I had my pension from 31 years with the County Transportation Authority, my Social Security, and a savings account I'd been contributing to since Derek was in middle school. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to maybe take one of those trips Carol had on her list. Enough, I thought, to feel like my life still had some forward motion. Then Derek came home. The first few months were fine. He was quiet, mostly. He went out during the day, came home for dinner, sometimes brought groceries without being asked. He fixed the gutter on the back of the house that I'd been putting off. He seemed genuinely sad about the divorce in a way that made me feel sorry for him, and I let that sorry feeling do a lot of work it shouldn't have. The ask came in August, a Sunday evening, the air still thick and warm, the two of us sitting on the porch with iced tea. He had this way of leading up to things by talking about something else first, and I'd noticed it when he was a teenager, and I noticed it again that night. He talked about the real estate market for a while, about interest rates, about a particular piece of commercial property outside of Philadelphia that he said was undervalued. He was animated, the way he got when something excited him. I listened. I'd always listened. "Dad," he said finally, setting down his glass, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react." I said, "All right." He needed $60,000. He'd found a partner, a guy he'd known for years, very reliable, very experienced. The property deal was solid. He'd done the numbers 3 different ways. He just needed the capital to get in, and he'd pay me back in 4 months with 8% interest. He had a written agreement. He'd have a lawyer look at it. He wanted to make sure I was protected. I felt something tighten in my chest, not surprise exactly, more like recognition. I had seen this before, not with Derek, but with other men I knew, men whose adult children had come back into their lives with business plans and soft voices and eyes that looked just a little too steadily at the floor. I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded like he respected that, and I almost believed he did. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I called my daughter, who said, "Dad, please don't." I talked to my neighbor, Frank, who had 30 years in commercial banking before he retired, and Frank said the same thing without the please. I looked at my savings account, at the number I'd spent 3 decades building, and I tried to figure out what $60,000 would mean to lose. Then I thought about Derek's face on that porch. My son. The boy I'd coached in Little League, the one who cried at Carol's funeral in a way that made me forgive him every hard thing that had ever passed between us. I transferred the money. I want to be honest with you, because this story is only worth telling if I'm honest. I transferred it because I wanted to believe I was helping him, but I also transferred it because I was lonely and he was in my house, and it felt, for a few weeks, like having a family again. That's not an excuse. It's a confession. The 4-month deadline came and went. Derek had an explanation, a good one, detailed, convincing. The deal had hit a regulatory snag. Another 6 weeks. He'd send me the documentation. The documentation never came. By the time 2 more months had passed, I had stopped asking about it directly. Something about the way his face closed off when I brought it up made me feel like the one doing something wrong. That's a thing people don't talk about enough. The way a person can make you feel guilty for wanting what they promised you. He had a gift for that, Derek did. Always had. The request for the trip came on a Wednesday morning in late September. He was leaving Friday. He had a conference in London, meetings in Amsterdam, a potential investor lined up in both cities. He needed 2 weeks. He needed money for the flights and the hotels because his card was temporarily frozen due to a banking issue he was in the process of resolving. He'd pay me back from the investor money when he returned. He would need me to transfer from my savings. $22,000. I looked at him across the kitchen table where Carol and I had eaten 30 years of breakfasts. "I don't have that kind of money to keep giving, Derek." "I'm not asking you to give it, Dad. I'm asking you to lend it. There's a difference." I heard Carol's voice in my head, something she said once when Derek was in his 20s and going through a rough patch. "You can love someone and still say no to them, Martin. Those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive." I'd nodded when she said it. I hadn't learned it. I transferred the money. He left Friday morning. Called once from the airport to say his flight was on time. That was the last I heard from him for 4 days. By the 2nd day, the refrigerator situation had become clear. I'd been buying groceries in smaller amounts than usual because Derek had said he'd handle the shopping when he got back. I had eggs, half a loaf of bread, some soup in a can, and the sad remains of a block of cheddar that had seen better days. I was 64 years old, sitting alone in my dead wife's kitchen, eating crackers and processed soup, while my son was somewhere over the Atlantic with $22,000 of my retirement savings. On the evening of the 3rd day, I went upstairs to find an old phone charger I thought I'd stored in the closet of Derek's room. I knocked first, out of habit. No one home. I opened the door. I want to tell you that I didn't go looking. I want to tell you that what I found was completely accidental. Both of those things are true, and they don't make what I found any easier to hold. His desk was covered in papers, the usual chaos, takeout menus, printed emails, a legal pad with phone numbers. The closet door was open. On the shelf above the hanging bar, between a stack of baseball caps and a shoebox, was a manila folder with a rubber band around it. The rubber band had snapped, and the folder was half open. Papers fanned out, invisible. I saw my name, Martin T. Hollis, typed clearly on the header of a legal document. Under it, the words, Durable Power of Attorney. My hands were steadier than I expected when I picked it up. I sat down on the edge of his unmade bed and read the whole thing slowly. Full authority to manage financial assets. Full authority to make medical decisions. Full authority to sell real property. The signature line had my name typed under it and a date, October 22. 8 days away. Behind the POA, a brochure. Cedarview Memory Care and Assisted Living. Compassionate care for those facing the challenges of aging. Monthly cost printed on the back, $4,100, Medicaid accepted. A pen mark was drawn around the phrase, private room, shared bath. Behind the brochure, a single page torn from a legal pad, a list in Derek's handwriting, the same cramped, left-leaning print I'd known since he was 8 years old, learning to write his name. Oct 22, sign POA. Get notary set up. Oct 23, call Dr. Reeves. Schedule cognitive eval. Oct 24-25, tour Cedarview, cognitive eval. Oct 24-25, tour Cedarview. Don't explain why. Oct 28, start paperwork for house listing. Nov 1, move-in target date. At the very bottom of the page, underlined twice, he won't fight it. He never does. I sat on my son's unmade bed for a long time. Long enough that the light changed in the room, the afternoon going gold and then gray. I held the folder in my lap and I thought about the $60,000 and the $22,000 and the 4 months that turned into 6 that turned into a year and 2 months of no payment. And I thought about Carol saying, you can love someone and still say no to them. And I thought about the fact that in 8 days, my son planned to have me declared cognitively unfit and moved into a shared bathroom in a memory care facility so he could list my house. I stood up. I put the folder under my arm. I walked back downstairs. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. Something had shifted inside me that was colder and cleaner than tears. I felt it settle into place like a joint in good woodwork, snug and permanent. I have 8 days, I said to the empty kitchen. Let's see what 8 days can do. The next morning, I called a number I had had in my wallet for 2 years without using it. Gerald Whitmore, state attorney, referred to me by Frank next door after Carol died. I'd kept the card thinking I'd need it for the will. I needed it for something else now. Gerald picked up on the second ring. I told him everything in 20 minutes, starting with the money transfers and ending with the legal pad. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. Mr. Hollis, he said, you need to come in today, this afternoon if possible. I was in his office at 2 o'clock. I brought the folder. Gerald read every page carefully, set them down, and looked at me over his glasses with the kind of expression a doctor wears when the news isn't good, but there's a clear course of action. The power of attorney isn't executed, he said. Your son doesn't have it yet. That's the key fact. Every step on that list depends on him getting your signature first. He's planning to have me evaluated. Declared incompetent. He can schedule an appointment. He can't compel a diagnosis. And if you have documentation of your cognitive function right now, any attempt to claim otherwise becomes nearly impossible. He folded his hands on the desk. What we need to do is move quickly and document everything. I want to arrange a formal cognitive assessment with an independent physician this week. I want written statements from people who interact with you regularly. And I want to start the process of securing your assets so that no power of attorney, fraudulent or otherwise, can touch them. I said, what about the money he took? Gerald looked at me steadily. That depends on whether you have documentation of the transfers and the promised repayment. Do you? I had kept every email, every text message. Derek was not careful about those things. He had always assumed I wouldn't know what to do with them. He had always assumed a great deal about me. Over the next 3 days, while Derek was still somewhere in Europe, I did more than I had done in a year. Gerald filed the necessary paperwork to place my savings account under a formal trust structure that would require 2-signature authorization for any withdrawal over $5,000. My daughter flew in from Colorado. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, where I'd eaten 30 years of breakfasts, and she held my hands, and she cried in a way I hadn't seen her cry since her mother's funeral. How long has this been going on? She asked. Long enough, I said. But it stops now. I had the cognitive assessment on Wednesday. Dr. Patricia Osei, independent practitioner, referred by Gerald. An hour and a half of questions, memory exercises, pattern recognition, notarized documentation of the results, no evidence of cognitive decline. Fully competent, dated and signed and filed with Gerald's office before noon. That afternoon, I drove to Frank's house and asked him to be a formal witness to a series of statements I was having notarized. Frank, who had known me for 18 years, who had watched me raise 2 kids and build a garden and bury a wife and keep going, looked at me across his kitchen table with something I can only describe as quiet fury on my behalf. Whatever you need, Martin, he said. Whatever you need. I also called my daughter's former college roommate, Diane, who had become an adult protective services caseworker in the county. I told her the situation. She told me the steps I could take if I needed to go further. She gave me names. She gave me numbers. She said, Martin, this is elder financial abuse. What your son has done already qualifies. You have options. I thanked her and hung up and sat with that for a moment. Elder financial abuse. My son. I thought about him at 8 years old, learning to write his name. I thought about Carol's voice. You can love someone and still say no. I went to the grocery store. Not the ShopRite where I'd been stretching my pension week to week. I drove past it and kept going to the Whole Foods on the other side of town, the one I'd passed for years without stopping, because it felt like it was for a different kind of life than mine. I pushed a cart through aisles that smelled like good bread and fresh herbs, and I put things in it without checking the price first. Thick-cut salmon, a dry aged ribeye, a wedge of Parmesan that cost $30, sourdough from the bakery counter, figs, dark chocolate, a bottle of sparkling water with a label I couldn't pronounce, a small tin of smoked oysters because Carol had always loved them and I'd never bought them for myself. The total came to $180, more than I'd spent on myself in months. I drove home, unpacked it all slowly, and filled the refrigerator the way a person fills a refrigerator when they intend to still be living in their house next week. That evening, I made dinner, real dinner, with attention. The salmon in a pan with butter and a sprig of thyme from Carol's garden, still alive in the pot on the back porch. Roasted asparagus. Sourdough with good olive oil. I set the table properly with the cloth napkins from the drawer, and I sat down at 6:30, and I ate in the quiet of my own house. The first bite of salmon made me close my eyes. I had not tasted food in months. I had been eating to survive, the way you breathe in a waiting room, just enough to keep going until something happens. But sitting there that evening, at Carol's table in our house on Clover Mill Road, I tasted something I hadn't tasted in a long time. The word for it isn't luxury. The word is mine. This is mine. This meal, this house, this evening, this life. Mine. I ate slowly. I washed the dishes by hand. I went to bed at 9 o'clock and slept for 8 hours without waking. Derek landed at Philadelphia International on a Friday morning. I know because I could see the flight tracker on my laptop. I watched the plane touch down. I poured my coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. He came through the door at 1:30, carry-on in tow, jacket over his arm, phone to his ear again. The same entrance as always. He looked rested. He looked, if I'm being honest, happy. The satisfied look of a man who has spent 10 days doing exactly what he wanted to do. He waved at me the way you wave at a piece of furniture. He talked on the phone for 5 more minutes, then hung up and looked around. Did you rearrange anything? Feels different in here. There's something in the garage, I said. He looked at me for a half second, then walked to the garage door, hit the button, and watched it roll up. He saw my car, same as always, parked on the right side. He saw the shelving units along the wall. He saw the old workbench in the back corner, and he saw that the workbench was covered in documents, printed emails, bank statements with wire transfers highlighted in yellow, the stack of folders Gerald had helped me assemble, and in the center, face up, the manila folder I'd found in his room, his power of attorney draft, his legal pad with the dated plan. He won't fight it. He never does. He stared at it the way a man stares at something his brain refuses to process. His phone slipped in his hand. His jaw went slack. "What is this?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was a man buying time. "That's the evidence," I said from the kitchen doorway. "All of it." He turned around. He looked at me. Something moved across his face that I hadn't seen before. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear. The practical, calculating kind. Dad. Dad, listen. Whatever you think you found, it's not what it looks like. Let me explain. Sit down, Derek. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had transferred $60,000, then $22,000, trusting the face across from me. He clasped his hands in front of him on the table, leaning forward, working up the explanation. I had seen that posture 100 times in his life. Whenever he'd broken something, whenever he'd been caught. I laid the manila folder on the table between us and opened it. October 22nd, I said. 8 days from when I found this. Signed Poe. Schedule cognitive evaluation. Tour Cedarview. Don't tell Dad why. Move-in target, November 1st. His face went through several expressions quickly. He settled on something that was trying to look hurt. That was just contingency planning. If something happened to you, if you got sick, I was being responsible. You were being responsible when you wrote, "He won't fight it." The hurt expression collapsed. He looked away. "Derek, I transferred $82,000 to you over 14 months. The first 60 for a deal that doesn't exist. I've checked. The LLC you described dissolved in 2021. The partner you named hasn't been in commercial real estate for 3 years. Silence. The 22,000 was for a trip to Europe. Hotels in London. A dinner in Amsterdam that cost 600 euros. I have the credit card notifications forwarded to my email. You added me as an account holder 2 years ago when you needed a credit boost. You forgot about that." His jaw tightened. The doorbell rang. I walked to the front door and opened it. Gerald Whitmore stood on the porch in his overcoat, briefcase in hand, the same steady expression he'd worn in his office all week. Beside him stood Frank, in his jacket, hands clasped, looking at me with the quiet fury I'd seen earlier, and behind them both, my daughter, who had flown back to Colorado 2 days ago and apparently booked a return flight without telling me. She looked at me across the threshold with red eyes and a set jaw and said, "Hi, Dad." I stepped back and let them in. Derek's face, when he saw Gerald, did something I hadn't seen it do since he was a teenager, caught in a lie so large it had no exit. It just stopped. Every performance, every calculation, everything he'd been building in those 30 seconds of buying time just stopped. Gerald set his briefcase on the table. "Mr. Hollis has asked me to be present for this conversation." He opened the briefcase, placed a document on the table. "This is a notarized record of all financial transactions between Mr. Hollis and his son over the past 14 months, with corresponding wire transfer records and email documentation of the promised repayments." He placed a second document beside it. "This is the result of Mr. Hollis's independent cognitive assessment, conducted Wednesday by Dr. Tennant, Patricia Osei, finding no evidence of decline in full legal competency." He placed the folder from the garage on top of both of them. "And this was found in the property, in a space under the primary resident's name, and has been notarized as evidence in the event of any future legal proceeding." Derek looked at the stack of documents. He looked at his sister. He looked at Frank, who had known him since he was 12 years old, and was looking at him now with 18 years of reassessment in his eyes. "This is insane," Derek said. "You can't. This is family. You're treating me like a criminal." "You planned to have me declared incompetent in 8 days," I said. "You planned to put me in a memory care facility so you could list this house. You wrote the date. You wrote the steps. You wrote the steps. You wrote that I wouldn't fight it." The room was quiet. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. Somewhere outside, a car went by on Clover Mill Road. "I want you to leave," I said. "Tonight." "Dad, I had the locks changed yesterday. You'll need to leave the key." I placed an envelope on the table beside the documents. "There's $500 in there, more than you left me when you took my pension to go to Europe." He stared at the envelope, then at me. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He looked at his sister. She looked back at him without flinching. "Don't," she said. "Don't put this on me." He tried 4 more times before he left. He tried the version where he was sorry, genuinely sorry, didn't mean for it to go this far. He'd been under so much pressure since the divorce. He wasn't himself. He tried the version where I was being manipulated by people who wanted to drive a wedge between us. Gerald had his own financial interests. Frank had never liked him. He tried the version where he reminded me of Carol, of how much she loved him, of what she would have wanted. I watched him try each one the way you watch someone try a door that isn't going to open. That one, the version with his mother's name, cost me something. I won't pretend it didn't. My eyes went hot for a moment, and I had to look at the kitchen wall until they cleared. Then I said, "Your mother told me that you can love someone and still say no to them. She was right. I loved you badly for a long time by never saying no. That ends today." He stood up. He picked up his carry-on. He took the $500 from the envelope without looking at me. He dropped his house key on the table. He walked at the front door without closing it behind him. Frank closed it. The four of us stood in the kitchen for a moment, in the particular silence that comes after something irrevocable. My daughter was the one who moved first. She walked across the kitchen and put her arms around me and held on, and I let her. Over her shoulder I could see the refrigerator, full, the salmon and the figs and the parmesan and the smoked oysters Carol had always loved. Gerald stayed another hour, went through everything I needed to know about the financial restitution process and what to document going forward. Frank stayed for coffee and said almost nothing, which was the right thing to do. My daughter stayed for the weekend. The first morning after Derek left, I woke at 6:30 to pale October light coming through the bedroom curtains. I lay there for a moment, taking inventory of the quiet. It was different from the quiet of the past 14 months. That quiet had been full of someone else's noise, the presence of a person taking up space and draining something from the air. This quiet was just the house. My house. Carol's garden out back, going gold. The coffee maker I'd set the night before. I got up, made the coffee, took it onto the back porch. The garden needed tending. It had been going slowly feral since Carol died. The raised beds weedy, the perennials overgrown. I looked at it and thought, I'll fix that this spring. I thought it easily, the way you think about something you have time for. My daughter called Diane the Adult Protective Services caseworker before she flew home. Diane walked me through the formal complaint process. Gerald filed the civil documentation for financial restitution. It was not a fast process, and I won't pretend otherwise, but Gerald told me in our first meeting that documented elder financial abuse cases with written evidence and notarized testimony have a high rate of outcome. He said it matter-of-factly, the way a contractor tells you a foundation is solid. 3 weeks later, Derek called from a number I didn't recognize. He left a voicemail. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, something scraped down without the performance. He said he was in Raleigh. He said he knew he had no right to ask anything. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know when he'd started thinking about people the way he thought about deals, but he knew it was wrong. I listened to it twice. Then I put the phone down on the kitchen table and sat with it for a while. I don't know what my son is. I know he is not the boy I coached in Little League. Or not only that boy. I know that grief and divorce and money and time can change what a person is made of, can erode certain things and leave behind a shape that looks familiar from a distance but isn't what it used to be. I know that I made it easier for this to happen by never saying no. I know that love and accountability are not opposites, and that choosing one over the other, as I did for decades, doesn't honor either. I know that I am sitting on my own back porch right now, in a November that is cold and bright and fully mine, with a cup of coffee in Carol's garden in front of me, and I am not a ghost in my own house anymore. My daughter calls every Sunday, same as always. Frank comes over for coffee on Wednesdays. I started going to a woodworking class at the community center on Tuesday evenings, something I hadn't done since my kids were young. There's a man there, about my age, a retired electrician named Howard, who makes furniture the old way, by hand, no shortcuts. We had lunch after class last week and talked for 2 hours. I thought about Carol's list on her phone. Savannah, Georgia, the Oregon coast, a small town in Vermont where her grandmother was from. I thought about going, Not to check something off, not to perform recovery, but because she'd wanted to see those places and she didn't get to, and I did. And honoring that feels like a way of keeping the true part of the long life we shared. I'm going to Vermont in the spring. Carol used to say that the most dangerous thing a good person can do is confuse patience with permission. I was patient with my son for a long time. I called it love. Sometimes it was. But patience without limits isn't love, it's an open door. And some people will walk through it all the way to the back of your house and take everything that isn't bolted down. I closed the door. Late, yes. Not too late. If you're listening to this from a place where someone is walking through your open door right now, I want you to hear me. You're allowed to close it. You're allowed to say, "This is mine," and mean it. You are allowed to fill your own refrigerator and set your own table and eat a meal in your own house without asking anyone's permission. You don't owe anyone your life, not even family. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want to stay with me. Because I'm just now learning what it means to live on my own terms, and I think we could all stand to learn it together. It's never too late to choose yourself. There's a quiet kind of destruction that happens slowly, so slowly you almost don't notice it until the morning you open a jar of oatmeal in your own kitchen and find it nearly empty, and you realize that what has been taken from you is not just money, it is the belief that you were worth protecting. I spent a long time making it easy for my son to take from me. Not because I was foolish, though I made foolish choices. Not because I didn't see the signs, though I chose not to look at some of them directly. I made it easy because I confused being a good father with being a man who never said no. And that confusion cost me $82,000 and nearly cost me my home, my autonomy, and whatever years I have left to live on my own terms. What I've come to understand is that the way a person treats you is never accidental. It is a reflection of what they have learned they can do. Derek didn't become the man who wrote that calendar in a single moment. He became that man across years of small lessons I taught him without meaning to. Every time I transferred the money, every time I accepted the explanation, every time I let a deadline pass without consequence, I was his teacher as much as I was his victim. And that is the hardest truth I've had to sit with. But here's what I also know. The moment I stopped teaching that lesson, everything changed. Not easily, not without grief, but completely. The people who stood with me in that kitchen, Gerald with his documents, Frank with his 18 years of quiet loyalty, my daughter who flew back without being asked, they didn't appear out of nowhere. They were there because I had lived in a way that made them want to show up. The relationships I had tended honestly without transaction, without manipulation. Those are the ones that held when everything else was being tested. That is not luck. That is the long, slow return on a different kind of investment. I think about the salmon I cooked the night I decided to stop surviving and start living. I think about sitting at Carol's table alone and tasting food, real food, for the first time in months. There was something in that moment that I want to name accurately, because it matters. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't defiance. It was reclamation. The act of a man deciding that his own hunger was worth feeding, that his own comfort was worth caring for, that his own life, the remainder of it, whatever shape it takes, belongs to him. If you are somewhere in this story right now, if you recognize the empty jar, the unanswered texts, the explanations that almost make sense, I want to say this as plainly as I can. The boundary you are afraid to set is not cruelty. The no you have been swallowing is not selfishness. Choosing yourself is not abandonment. It is the only honest thing left to do when everything else has been taken. Martin didn't save himself by becoming harder. He saved himself by finally becoming honest about what had happened, about what he had allowed, and about what he still wanted his life to look like. That honesty, arrived at late and at great cost, turned out to be the most valuable thing in the house. More than the furniture, more than the savings, more than anything Derek could have carried out the door. It is never too late to tell the truth, starting with the truth you tell yourself.